June 14, 2000, Tampa, Florida. Retired U.S. Army intelligence colonel George Trofimov drives to an airport hotel with the hopes of providing information for financial gain in a desperate attempt to avoid financial ruin. Reckless spending led to desperation, and a sense of loyalty to his homeland remained despite his field-grade rank. George Trofimov meets with a man he believes to be an FSB officer, but instead is detained by an undercover FBI special agent. This is the story of the highest-ranking officer in U.S. military history who ended up becoming a Russian spy. Born on March 9, 1927, in the Weimar Republic, he was raised by his father Vladimir, who was a major in the anti-communist White Army, and his mother, Ekaterina Kartali, a concert pianist. It was a stable life in the very beginning, until his mother died in 1928, and Vladimir descended into poverty. So, in response, he temporarily sent his son to be raised by family friends, Vladimir and Antonina Sharavov. And Antonina's son from a previous marriage was Igor Susemil, who George, even into his old age, referred to as his brother. This is an extremely important piece of information which I want you to remember. Anyways, in 1943, Vladimir remarried, and his son moved in with him and his new wife. However, the family was soon forced to separate again due to Allied bombing raids on Berlin. In the fall of 1944, George was ordered for conscription into the German army, but he instead fled to occupied Czechoslovakia and hid until the end of the war. He then once again fled, this time from the advancing Soviet army over into the American zone of occupied Germany. He worked for a bit as an interpreter for the US Army before illegally entering Paris. While staying there, he was embraced by the Paris's community of white émigrés, many of whom had known his father, and soon after was sponsored by the Society of Friends for Emigration to the United States in 1947. Yet, just 1 year later, Trofimov enlisted in the US Army and was already back in occupied Germany, where he saw his father for the first time since 1943. He received an honorable discharge from active duty in 1956, before this time joining the intelligence side of the military in 1959. He served primarily in the Kingdom of Laos and West Germany, and in 1969 he was promoted to the Chief of the United States Army Element at the Nuremberg Joint Interrogation Center, or JIC for short. The JIC, a center for questioning defectors and refugees from the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact countries, was jointly run by American, French, and West German intelligence services. Trofimov had access to all classified information received by or produced by US Army intelligence at the JIC. So to put it simply, he held top-secret security clearances. And it was around this time that his old foster brother Igor Susemil made a re-entrance, coming to his aid. Igor, now known as Irini under his religious name, was a bishop of the Russian Orthodox Church at the time. But he didn't reach out to the now Major Trofimov out of spiritual or friendly reasons, make no mistake. It was instead because he heard that Trofimov was in need of funds due to his wife buying expensive furniture and decided to take advantage of this. It wasn't out of his goodwill, but rather because he was actually collaborating with the KGB. That's right, the KGB was literally using the clergy both inside and outside the USSR to recruit potential informants. So it went down like this. It began in the early 70s, very informally, of course. No photographs, just talking. At first, it was just a conversation between the two of them, something about current events, of course. Irini would ask him something, and he'd simply respond. He would ask his opinion on something, and then maybe ask what his unit thinks about it, or the American government. As for how he got paid, originally Trofimov said he needed money, which the bishop obviously knew. So he loaned him 5,000 Deutschmarks. Then they kept meeting, because Trofimov just kept needing more money, and information kept coming like that. The bishop realized the wealth of information Trofimov possessed, and with this, Phase 2 was initiated. Irini forgave the loan debt that Trofimov kept accumulating. In fact, it never actually mattered. He simply then said he could give him more money, but then he would have to do a few things for him. And that's how George Trofimov's espionage career really got started. He was put on a payroll of 7,000 Deutschmark per week, the payments always made in used bills. Sensitive military information started being discussed, of course in a fraternal manner, and while the financial payouts increased, so did the depth of the spying Trofimov conducted. As an asset, he was codenamed Marquis by KGB General Oleg Kalugin, who encouraged the bishop to keep exploiting him as a source. He began smuggling home every classified document he could obtain to be photographed with a special camera and tripod provided by the Soviets. These photographs were routinely of documents. However, these documents were routinely of interrogation reports and troop movements along the Fulda Gap, a highly contentious area of the Cold War. The film was passed on to KGB agents during meetings in Austria. Trofimov's information informed the Soviets of what American forces knew about their capabilities and limitations, both tactically and strategically. This information, in the case of a battle between the West and the East, would have been devastating to American assets. In 1987, despite providing all this useful information and in turn being paid $250,000 over the course of his career, this successful partnership between the KGB and Trofimov came to a close when Irene told him to stop his espionage work for the Soviets. As for why, well, we don't know for sure, but one can assume it was due to the rapidly changing landscape of the Soviet Union at the time, with the end of the Cold War near and the many policy reforms happening during the Perestroika movement. He also received the Order of the Red Banner, the Soviet award presented to extraordinary bravery and self-sacrifice in the defense of the socialist homeland, showing just how valuable his espionage truly was. Years go by, and Trofimov may have thought he was safe. But as they say, karma always catches up to you. The year is 1992, and a retired KGB senior archivist known as Vasily Mitrokhin has defected to the British, taking with him over 50,000 pages of classified papers and handwritten notes on KGB operations at home and abroad, taken over 25 years. The archives included evidence that a NATO interrogation center was being compromised by a mole codenamed Marquis. Mitrokhin didn't have a name, but he was able to produce a vague sketch of the traitor. Furthermore, the Soviet files he delivered described the spy as a career American intelligence officer and the collaborator who carried the secrets as a Russian Orthodox clergyman. On December 14, 1994, Trofimov and Irene were arrested and interrogated by the German Federal Police based on the mentioned sketch. While in custody, Trofimov was informed by his commanding officer that his security clearance and pension had both been revoked. They were both taken before a judge, but since Germany's espionage laws have a 5-year statute of limitations, the judge refused to file charges, and as a result, they were released. After this short victory, they left Germany to retire in a gated community in Melbourne, Florida. Now here, he may be thinking he fully got away with his traitorous actions, but he also began to spiral financially once again. His love of a lavish lifestyle could not be maintained by his meager income, especially with his pension now revoked. Their new neighbors were intrigued by his love of gourmet dining and luxurious wines. Living off credit cards was the status quo for Trofimov, and the debt began to accumulate. To relieve the burden, George took a second mortgage out on the house. Despite his wife insisting they could not afford a new car, Trofimov bought one anyway. In Floridian fashion, Trofimov began working at a Publix supermarket bagging groceries, hoping it would alleviate his debts. He also believed that when his good friend Irene died, he'd be left money. But that never ended up happening. More time goes by, and it's July 1997. A disgraced Trofimov in financial ruin gets the phone call of his dreams. Russia was coming to save him from himself. An alleged SVR officer named Igor Galkin offers Trofimov compensation for rebuilding his file, as most of it was destroyed by a defecting analyst. They scheduled a meeting at a nearby hotel, and Trofimov spilled everything about his services for the KGB, as well as his desperate need for more money. He even said, and I quote, "In my soul, I'm Russian. I'm not an American. I was never an American. It's just help for the motherland." In response, Galkin promised that the SVR would help financially, but warned that it would take time. May 10th, 2000. Igor Galkin phones Trofimov after a lengthy silence. Everything's approved, and he wished to meet with Trofimov on June 14th at the Tampa International Airport Hilton Hotel. Trofimov came for the meeting, expecting to be given $20,000 in cash as well, but instead, he was arrested by the FBI. That's right. Igor Galkin was no SVR officer. He was FBI Special Agent Dmitry Drojinsky, a fellow Russian-American who specialized in impersonating a KGB operative in order to trick suspected moles into confessing their guilt. And let me tell you, it worked beautifully. Trofimov was convicted by a federal jury of espionage and sentenced to life in prison on June 26, 2001. He died in federal prison in California on September 19, 2014, and to this day remains the most senior officer in US military history to have been charged with or convicted of espionage. Thank you for watching.